Hello?
Hello, is this Jack?
It is.
Jack, this is Dustin Wilmus from KMSU Radio. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am excellent. I'm glad to have you on the phone today.
Thank you.
Well, we'll get started then, and I'll ask you, a little bit about your early days. What kind of made you want to become a musician?
Well, I was born in 56, January, and like many, I saw the Beatles on Sullivan. It was a real mind-blower to watch that, watch that show every Sunday night and have that come on there.
Sure.
And so I do recall vaguely, cutting out cardboard guitars with the kids in the neighborhood, and just miming a little bit or being pretty fascinated with it, as a phenomenon. And friend, I have an older sister, who's about 7 years older, who was bringing home records. I don't know if that early, but there was definitely something looming in the air that took effect much later, really. So, but still before I played. So, if I want to jump up in the time zone from seeing the Beatles, and I'm just talking about getting the early records. I mean, she brought home. I remember the Young Rascals, "Ain't Gonna Eat Out My Heart Anymore," which is a pretty hard R&B tune for a white group, and then there was the first Jefferson Airplane song, actually not White Rabbit, but Somebody to Love, I think it was.
Okay.
And those were singles that were around and in the air, and then maybe in the late 60s, I remember getting a couple of records from her that, or getting them, or at least being aware of them, like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Child's Father the Man, stuff like that. But I need to go back and say I had a friend my age, and I remember I didn't play guitar yet, but he had one. He had an old Silvertone acoustic, and I remember sitting and trying to do phrase a Bob Dylan song, probably Positively Forestry, and thinking it was just impossible, the phrasing of it. Now, of course, we didn't have that term then because we were just little kids. So there was that little bit, and maybe one time asking him to show me to play, but he gave up. And yet I was playing. I'm jumping all over the place. I'm sorry, but
that's all right.
I was playing violin in third grade for a brief while, actually viola, and that story quickly was that I really wanted to play drums. And I don't know the exact circumstances, but it seems like maybe my mom took me down for signing up a little late or something. And I remember I think his name was Mr. Salty. I always thought of him as Mr. Salty because he had, I think he had white hair and a big thick walrus mustache or whatever, but he was the orchestra leader in elementary school. And he said, I'm sorry, the only thing we have is the violin. And I jumped up and said, I'll take anything I want to play. So that's kind of a famous, not famous, but it's a story that sticks. And yet it's interesting because I didn't really want to play the violin. I guess I just wanted to do it. So it was some sort of impulse to be included, but I look back and think, that's not exactly what I wanted. And then I don't know why. I remember they used to line us up in class, and I don't know if it was from how well you played, but I remember being lined up and perhaps being advanced from the number 10 to number 1, and maybe it was based on skill or something. So I do recall he claimed wanted me to move over to viola because they didn't have viola players, and I had the hands, larger hands and the skill. And I do remember getting a private teacher, which my parents seemed rather surprised by. I mean, I took it because there's a lot of negative energy coming from them towards me in my childhood. I think I sort of took it as that it was surprised, like how could he be any good in anything or something like that, perhaps, which is really not funny. But anyway, I got frustrated with it and tried to play it with my thumb on my lap like a guitar. This is all in third grade, and I don't remember if it was teasing, because, if you had a violin case, you might have gotten teased. In this case, a viola case. Later I found out the viola was somewhat in those circles, for adults is considered an inferior instrument because, the violinists are the ones who are all competitive. So I don't know how much of that is good or bad or true or what, but nevertheless I quit. And I remember going into his office and saying I didn't want to do it anymore, and he was very discouraging about me quitting. He says, we're just about, you're just about to perform and be in the orchestra. It's going to be great. And I broke into tears because I did not want to do it for some reason. And so I don't know what all that was really about, but it seemed like crying got me out of it. And I felt somewhat free. And I don't think I really played anything, but I was incredibly into the music of the time. And I do remember, again, now this would be probably before. I remember going with my grandmother, who lived in Florida, where I was born, but all this was occurring in Allentown, Pennsylvania, because by first grade I was already living there. And the Beatles thing was happening by sort of, third, fourth grade. I remember getting the album Something New, which was now, because we're all aware of, the proper releases and everything's international now these days, with CDs. But back then, nobody had, unless it was some older super hip person, nobody had British imports. They just would have whatever was coming out in America, which was a little late and everything. And so Something New wasn't even really a real record. In fact, on Facebook, I have a little thing in my photo albums that shows the difference between the albums and what they really were, which was all based around Hard Day's Night, which was their third record. But I had that, and sadly and interestingly, I sold it, which I still feel bad about to this day because my grandmother bought it for me as my first record so I could buy more Rolling Stones albums. And that was what had happened was by 1965, Satisfaction came on the radio, and it was a total, like a siren going off, like they were going to bomb or something. When that guitar lick went off, I would run through the yards and tell my sister, tell the other kids, it's on the radio, it's on the radio. You can't imagine how exciting it was. And my sister had bought Out of Our Heads, which had that song on it, which is about the Stones' fourth album, and I bought it off of her, and I still have it. So that was my first purchase, and I just remember being so into the Stones, going back and buying the earlier records, which had come out a couple of years before. And it wasn't that I didn't like the Beatles. I did, but I sort of chose the Stones, and I guess people were making those kind of foolish things where you have to pick one group over another, and It wasn't really that or peer pressure. It's just I really liked them. And it was also economics, which is always factored in somewhat, meaning what could I afford? And, I remember if I was, again, selling my Beatle album to buy a Stones album, or, saving up lunch money or doing whatever so I could get these Stones records. And it seemed like all my friends had the Beatle records. So, you could just, you'd be over visiting, you sit out on the floor and somebody play Beatles 65 or Beatles' second album, and the stuff was on the radio constantly. It's not that the Stones were obscure, but they were not as available as the Beatles initially. Another standout memory from then was seeing Hendrix open for the Monkees.
Wow.
Yeah. I was in Miami, where I would vacation every summer, going down from Pennsylvania and spending at least part of the summer with my same grandmother, my mom's mom, down there. And the Monkees were popular. I mean, when you're that young, back then, you could be a kid and be hip and listen to what is now, proven classic music like the Beatles and Stones. It was kind of obvious the Monkees were sort of imitating them to even an 11-year-old, but it was still fun, and it was, TV. So you watched it, and I wasn't like, oh, they're bogus, and, but you liked music. If it was good, it was good. But anyway, that was like a first concert experience. So my sister, I think, dropped me off so I could go, and lo and behold, and I was sitting pretty far away, this phenomenon, these little dots on the stage would look like three big tumbleweeds, That's all I could make out, which were these afro hairdos, and this strange sound. And I remember the kids were not digging it. By the way, if you don't know the history, Jimmy only opened about 3 shows in that kind of oddball pairing, and Miami was one of them. And this was, I believe, July 9th, 1967. And I was 11 and a half, and what I remember, what stands out as a sort of view of myself and my attitude over the years is that I was defending him. I was saying to the kids in the row in front of me, hey, give it a chance. This is cool. And I thought it was really cool, but I thought the name was kind of dumb. I thought it sounded like what I maybe would later be aware would be like a soul band name, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. I didn't think it was a cool name. I thought it sounded like a soul band, which makes sense considering, that was his history, except the Experience thing was had other references with
Sure.
psychedelia and all, which I knew nothing about. I knew about peace signs and, James Bond and all this good 60s stuff, but I wasn't doing drugs when I was 11. So it was pretty innocent. But, so fast forward a little bit to being in my bedroom back in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Purple Haze came on the radio. I'm hoping that you're familiar with this material.
Sure, yeah.
But the intro of that song, again, the low-end distorted sound in roughly in the key of E as Satisfaction was, probably more like E flat because Hendrix tuned down this strange, what I later would learn later on was the famous tritone or the devil's interval, bom, bom, bom. I'm hearing this on the radio, this phenomenal, and going, where have I heard that before? And I realized it was a few months earlier I'd heard it live. And then at the end, I was waiting for the DJ. He says, yeah, that was the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Purple Haze. I flipped out. I went, I saw those guys. And I ran out of my house and ran down to Hess's department store downtown Allentown, which really was only a few blocks away, I've later learned, and bought the single, Purple Haze, Wind Cries Mary. And I remember running up and down the street and just screaming with it.
Yeah.
And maybe even knocking on semi-strangers' doors. You've got to hear this. You've got to hear this. Finally getting a little bit across town to my friend who had the guitar from the Dylan story, and my best friend, also named Jack. His older brother and sisters making fun of it, saying they hated it, and him listening to it with me. And, of course, we know the rest is history. So I had pretty good taste. Again, I wasn't playing yet. So your question was, how did I start playing, or did you want musical background?
Well, no, just kind of, I think you touched on, what kind of sparked that interest in wanting to be a musician.
So it was being young in the 60s and how fantastic it was. I didn't know I wanted to be a musician. What happened was I moved to Rochester in the middle of seventh grade when I was about 13. And somewhere in that year and a half we were there, my father, who was Russian and had a pretty sort of, to put it mildly, gruff way of acting and speaking towards me. One might term that nowadays as abusive. But he said, knowing that I was listening to records, and by then I'd probably gotten Santana, Chicago, and was playing my albums in my room, he said something like, which I recall in a derogatory way, something like, you listen to that music, blah, 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 blah. I bet you look at you sitting on the couch doing nothing. I bet if I bought you a guitar, you wouldn't even play it. I told a therapist that story years later, and he seemed to reinterpret it as it was like he did me a favor, like maybe it was a challenge. Maybe he intuitively knew
Sure.
what was going on. And I like to look at it that way now. It's a little happier way of looking at it, although I could also say, what if it wasn't my destiny and I only kept playing? In other words, suffered the life of a guitar player to not prove him right. Who knows,
Yeah.
Anyway, I got a cheap, like a $10 guitar. I remember actually saying to him, I was in the back seat of the car, are you serious? Are you still going to get me a guitar? Oh, yeah. He remembered, and we did, and I think the first thing I tried to play on that incorrectly, I didn't learn until years later the way it was voiced, is, again, low end, different key this time, was Chicago's 25 or 6-4, ba-na-na-na-na, na-na-na-na-na, and then I went on from there and got an electric, and I never really looked back, but there was never a thought like, this is what I'm going to do, rather than do something else. I mean, another part of the 60s, backing up a little, was Jacques Cousteau with his famous skin diving show, and then James Bond was a obsession, and so by Thunderball he hit with scuba diving, with spear guns, and I wanted all that, and plus I was from Miami and used to spend every summer at the ocean, so I thought I wanted to be an oceanographer at one time just so I could get a bunch of scuba gear. which I never learned to do, but I did skin dive as a hobby. But I never made a choice like this is what I'm gonna do. I just started playing. Next thing you know, I was in bands. We moved to San Diego. A lot of this stuff is on my bio on Facebook if people are interested to look on there and read it. But anyway, and just one thing led to another, and then it became like a lot of things in life as you get older, it becomes a matter of, and I don't mean this to come across the wrong way, like it was purely mercenary, but one needs to make money. And so I wonder how many choices had to do with that. You want to get in a band and you want to get paid, and then that becomes a lot more serious as time comes along and you're married and have a kid. But it was never something cynical like, oh, I do this because it's a great way to make a living, because it generally isn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I look back, it's more looking back and going, wow, I wonder what, when, we're older and we have hindsight, and we go, I wonder what was motivating these decisions. But certainly economics always has some kind of play, I think the word survival is a little extreme, but, making choices. And that also has to do with your spiritual outlook and how much confidence you have. And it's funny, a lot. I call it the kinesis of youth. I mean, for me, I was just going forward. There wasn't really much of a plan. I wouldn't certainly anything I would ever call functional in typically psychosocial terms. Like sit down, have a 5-year plan, value yourself. All those kind of things is more like it's just moving forward.
Yeah.
So that seems like a good place for you to jump in. It's quite a mouthful.
Well, yeah, and you talk about, those early days and moving out to the West Coast. Was the decision to join the Red Hot Chili Peppers, was that sort of a monetary one, or is that just something you fell into?
Well, that's good. Considering what I just said, I had a feeling you might ask it that way. But that's fine. It was a fall into thing. What had happened was it was an interesting time in my life. Now, I had been in L.A. since late '77. And was doing all sorts of various things and being as musically active as I could be, especially the first 2 years without a car, which got stolen like right when I moved up there. But I don't want to go into all the details of who I played with right now, but there was a lot going on. And most significantly, there was, those things can be looked up, you know what I mean? Unless they're important, and I'll be happy to. But mainly, I mean, there was a new wave scene happening that I sort of fell into 79, 80, 81. It was very active, and it seemed like a really great community going on. Lots of clubs, lots of bands, lots of fun playing. I didn't really know much about the music business, but I was doing it, and it was, I guess, intuitively and consciously pursuing a very briefly established, and if I never even thought about it for more than a nanosecond, there was an edict of if I'm going to leave the idyll of San Diego for the hell of L.A., I'm going to do it to make it and to do original music of some kind. So I had somewhat of a black and white outlook that, if I wasn't going to just play in cover bands. I was going for it. So I didn't know how that would happen, but I was just falling into things, one thing leading to another, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that time, sort of, especially at 80, when this group, Tony the Movers, it looked like we were going to get signed. There were loads of bands around. And things didn't really pan out in that direction. So it was just, go from one group to the next and kind of subsist and, live in an apartment and have a girlfriend, don't have a girlfriend, all sorts of life things in my 20s, right? Well, the thing that was really significant prior to joining the Chili Peppers is, and I had been whatever it meant. And I look back and often call it a junk food vegetarian, but I'd become a vegetarian in like early 77. So that sort of shaped me a little bit. Sometimes that was being real healthy all around. Sometimes it wasn't. But that led later to, in 83, to a really significant change and a decision based on things from the past, but pretty much on my own, to investigate and become a macrobiotic person. And I said macro, not micro. And that is something, again, people can look up and learn about. the principles still guide me to this day, but I don't follow the diet rigidly or really at all. My diet's very, very, very broad, but I'm still a big believer in organic food, natural food. So this is way back when, before it became, more of a trend, and there were no big Whole Food stores. There were little co-ops around and whatnot. Of course, L.A. was super progressive, and there was going to be that kind of thing in the air anyway. But thing was, it became a real focus. Study basically, I don't like the word. I don't care for organized religion, and I would not say it was a religion then. But looking back, I behaved as if it was, I believe, and then to be fair, and became part of a community of people, and around this diet and lifestyle that was very Oriental, like ancient Oriental influence. It still affects me, like I said, to this day, the yin and the yang, all the stuff, basically Taoism. And there was a huge focus on diet, and being a food obsessed person, it was kind of perfect. So I had really gotten into that to the point where, although I had never made any official quitting of playing, it seemed to me like metaphorically the guitar was more under the bed and the cooked pots and pans and the sea salt were out. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
So, just saying, it was really becoming a somewhat different person. I was never a big druggie, but I was, being a rock and roller and having a good time. But it was always moderate compared to the things I saw around me, just in quantity. And I was never like I drank and smoked some weed and did this kind of stuff. But this was a very, very strict, clean, big change, and I was going along with that for a good number of months when in late '83, and so my life had changed. I didn't have a girlfriend or a wife at the time. I was kind of in between things. This was my focus. And one day the phone rang, and once again my sister, Gail, who's often been an influence in one way or another, said, "Hey, there's this couple of guys I know." She was a real Hollywood person. I lived out by the beach in Santa Monica, and I would go into Hollywood, do Hollywood things, and I would come home. She lived in Hollywood. She said, "I know these," and was really part of the scene, was way more into the punk rock thing and the artsy type thing than me. I wasn't. I just like good music. And she said, "There's these guys, I guess," I don't know if she said Flea and Anthony, or if she's a couple of guys, and they need a guitar player. I don't know if she gave me his number or can I give you his number and blah, 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 blah. So my sister was directly responsible for making that introduction. And I believe I called Flea, and I remember he seemed rather pleasant, like a nice person on the phone. And we made some sort of, best I can remember, we made some sort of arrangement for me to come over and audition, which I later found out many, many, many people in the music community were doing. And I didn't know anything about them. I'd never heard of them. I didn't know about their few performances they'd been doing. I didn't know Flea. I certainly didn't know Anthony. I didn't know the punk rock scene that much, so I didn't really know that he had been in Fear. Not in that state, although he was, the group.
Right.
Anyway, I just wasn't hanging out there then, and when I was doing, like I said, I was into my macro thing, and I wasn't going to clubs, and the club scene had changed. I was aware of things, like I remember I'd heard about X, but it just wasn't my thing so much. And if there were camps that were determined by the different clubs, if we back up a couple of years, there might have been more punk-type clubs and punk-type things, and then there was more of the new wave, and I was more in the new wave camp, although I wasn't wearing skinny ties and things like that. It just wasn't punk for punk's sake, which I just wasn't drawn to, which is a big difference. They were, but it was, I don't know how much of that is a musical thing or a fashion thing or just a
right.
difference in our age. But anyway, so I talked to him and we set something up, and I went over, and I don't recall if Anthony was there, and I want to remember the first time that he wasn't. But I had met Cliff, who is now the drummer, replacing Jack Irons, the original drummer. I'm not going to explain the whole story because it's available to find out about how the other guys had a contract already and this group, what is this?
Sure.
That he's been part of, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I went over and we did some kind of, and I remembered Cliff because I had met him a couple of years back when I had just sort of miraculously found Captain Beefheart and his nerdy band sitting out on a bench in the lobby of a studio I was recording in Burbank at Amigo Studios. I was like, oh my God, there's Captain, who I adored Captain Beefheart even back then, and there were all these kind of artsy guys, and he had played me some music, and it was fantastic. What's amazing is I look back and go, wow, that was such a lucky, incredible experience. But at the time when these dreams would kind of come true, they were also sort of professional events, if you know what I mean. I mean, in other words, I'm in the middle of it, and you want to be a peer, not like a drooling fan, you know. So I was working that day myself. They were next door rehearsing. So, but I remembered Cliff. I said, "Oh, I remember that guy. He was Captain Beefheart's drummer, and maybe I'd met him one other time." So he's drumming away, and striking me as very unique. You know, making up these very tom-tom, almost Beefheart-inspired, like this. Maybe we were playing True Men or a riff from it or something. Flea was literally saliva flying all over the place, shaking his head, which would have broken my neck if I had tried to do that. Just going nuts, and we were just jamming in E with wild tom-toms, foaming at the mouth, bass player pounding and slapping away, practically breaking strings, and me doing my best E chord jam, funk metal, whatever, instinct, right? So I thought to myself, I said, wow, this is kind of whacked out. This guy's definitely got a lot of energy, and I said, this is interesting. But I don't know, we'll see what happens. So I went home, and I had a girlfriend, and I didn't know this at the time, or, girl I was seeing, not like a serious girlfriend or anything, but she, apparently one of her boyfriend was, who will remain nameless, and so shall she was breaking up with him and didn't want him to get the gig. So remember, she took me out for Thai food and was like, here, have a second portion and stuff, and was like saying, because I was trying to decide whether to join them if they asked, or be part of this other group with a guy I had just met, Barry Goldberg, who's a sort of keyboard producer legend from back in the Dylan and Electric Flag and Mike Bloomfield. He played on Super Session a little bit. So these older guys, and they were putting a band together and had a record deal, and I didn't. They weren't really quite as interesting. I mean, the Chili Pepper thing was kind of like, wow. What went through my head was, nobody knows I can do this extent of like guitar playing, and there'd be a lot. It would seem like there'd be some freedom to really be like the only guitar player. I love pop songs. I love doing little simple composed solos, but this looked like a situation where it's just a fleeting thought, but I remember it going through my head. I could show people a little more about what I can do. And the other thought was, they have a record deal. So that answers your question so much. It's just, that was just always a goal that I had told myself, I'm going to go to LA and live in the smog. It's got to be to advance in that arena, to move myself more into the ones who were doing it than the ones who were not, is, I guess, the way I was thinking. So that was in the back of my mind. I thought, well, gee, here's an opportunity to be heard and to do something a little different and a little strange. But another part of me, maybe the cynical part of me or pessimistic part of me, thought, this is old hat for me, because this is, I call it E-chord jams, but it's sort of like this, what everyone calls funk rock and stuff. To me, it's like Jimi Hendrix or, just stuff you would jam on. It didn't seem particularly song-oriented. Rap was barely around, and I wasn't really into it. It was benign then. It wasn't malicious. It didn't turn into gangster rap, which was malicious and awful, and probably, I heard recently, created by private prison factions. That's another story.
Yeah.
To get into all of this stuff. There's some really ugly stuff. Not into it. Not into negativity, really. Anyway, so I guess some time went by, and I think I may have called Flea once and said, I was just wondering if any update, because they seemed pretty interested in me. And he said, well, we're still listening to other people, but we're definitely keeping you in mind, and blah, 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 blah. So another time came by and played again. I know the manager was there. I don't know why. The only time that I can recall, I don't have a great memory, but I can only recall Anthony is in generally negative scenarios, like when he was being hostile towards me. So there's a lot of times he's not in the picture when I'm pulling up a memory, so I can't say if he was there. I imagine he was, and there might have even been some friends. But I played again, another fervent E-chord jam. I felt very confident. I was playing well, and their manager, Lindy, who was great throughout my time in the band, other than I guess him, when I got fired because he didn't do it. There was no communication. But I'm just saying, in general, I liked him, considered him a friend, and he was very complimentary. And what Flea said really struck me as odd, and I've quoted. Hopefully I'm quoting it accurately, but the event that I'm remembering I've brought it up often because it really sticks in my mind as something very, very odd. But when I finished playing, the air felt really charged in a good way, and Flea came up to me and said, "It's something like this. It's going to be really hard keeping up with you, man. It's going to be really hard keeping up with you, man." Kind of almost like this resentful acceptance that I'd have to be the guitar player. And isn't it, don't you say, I don't know what it meant. We haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about it since then, and I would just think it was like, and I was very competitive myself, but I would think if you were getting together with the band, it's like, wow, this is going to be fun. You're great. Hey man, you're great. This is going to be fun. Or like, let's do this. Instead it felt competitive or like, Maybe I misinterpreted it. Who knows? But it really struck me as very, very odd and a red flag. If somebody's really competitive and they look upon other players, especially someone they don't know, that they need rather than want because their own guitar player isn't wanting to be or isn't able to be in their band. We're talking about Hillel now. Maybe there's already resentment from the get-go. Like,
sure.
Maybe we resent our parents because we need them, but we don't really want them telling us what to do. So I don't know. This is a psychological interpretation, but it was very weird, and it left me kind of scratching my head. Nevertheless, by the time I got home, there was a phone message. We used to have answering machines in those days. I still use one. I don't have a cell phone. But anyway, they had left a 3-part harmony, stacking thirds, harmony, you got the gig, you got the gig, you got the gig, and which I was very, very touched by. So something in me wanted the acceptance. And I remember me being in my little apartment hearing that and feeling very emotional that I was being accepted into something. And that's how I got in the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, with all that being said, when the debut album came out and you guys were on tour, was that a difficult time then? You mentioned you weren't really into the punk scene and kind of the tensions with Anthony. Was that difficult on that first tour?
But the level of at least verbal abuse, and there was some little pranks that were done that were horribly humiliating and were physically abusive on stage, were relentless. It's also something I look at as I didn't have much emotional or psychological sophistication at that point. Marriage would certainly help me learn more about that, which was right around the corner. Also, the zeitgeist in the later on in the later 80s and 90s became, especially having kids, was all about improving oneself, a lot of 12-step program stuff going on. All that came later. But at the time, I was pretty naive and probably had all my own, like we all do, guards up. And, I prefer the younger person because it wasn't complicated. It was just, I just was who I was, for better or for worse. But they were so abusive that it was cartoonish. I mean, it almost seemed like they couldn't mean it because it was so relentless and horrific, nonstop, from very second I was in the band, trying to tell me what to play, trying to this and this. I just really, I don't know if it was the brown rice and all the sea salt, which makes you yang and strong and, and clear-headed, but I just was only going to do it my way. I just felt, if I'm joining a band, I'm going to be me. I'm not going to be I'm not going to learn some other guy's parts. You know what I mean? It's just, they were, so the whole thing was weird. And maybe the way I would cope would be to be dismissive of punk rock, maybe just to fight back a little bit, but they were so excited about it. Like it was a mantra, punk rock, everything would be punk rock. Some idiot on Facebook, obviously I'm on Facebook, you probably wouldn't have found me. And I try, if I'm going to do something, I try and do it well. So I'm there to have a good time. And, I've got loads and loads of international people who are Chili Pepper fans, and most of them don't pay any attention. But I like to have people recognize the stuff I post. I have fun with the photos, but I'm not up there for politics or to promote gigs or anything like that. I mean, occasionally I'll say when I'm playing, but who cares? But anyway, my point is I lost my point in explaining that. I'm trying to think what we were talking about. Oh, about punk rock. There's some guy on there that's wanted to be friends, and I think he's a guy my age, and everything is filtered to this punk rock manifesto. No offense if that's your thing, but, it's like everything's punk rock. Like, there was a rainstorm on the bayou the other day. How punk rock? And I'm like, I kind of get that, but it's like I don't go around throwing the devil sign and screaming rock and roll all the time.
Right.
I mean, sometimes if something's overwhelmingly good, it's kind of hard not to. If I put Black Sabbath on, I mean, I get a deep emotion, but I don't have to throw the sign. You know what I'm saying? And so it's not I can understand the fashion of people hanging on to what they were into when they were 14. I certainly still love more than anything, even though I've expanded a little further back to old blues, and I'll even put on a classical radio station occasionally, and a little bit of jazz thanks to my son because he's a jazz musician. But I still love what I loved when I was 14. I still love all those groups more than anything else, much to my wife's chagrin. Like, if I put on Grand Funk or Mountain or Black Sabbath, she's sickened by it. But she's 6 years older than me, so I can understand that. But the punk rock thing to me was just, and the groups that I ended up liking from that period, they wouldn't have a pedigree according to punk rock. Punk rock had to be just like, I don't know, but apparently there were probably some things that were probably very lyrically progressive that I'm just not aware of. But it was something I wasn't part of, and I don't really believe the Chili Peppers are or were either. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think they loved it and felt a kinship with it, but I don't believe they are a punk rock band, or ever were. I mean, just playing stuff really, really fast doesn't mean I don't know what a real punk rocker is. Yeah. It might be something like the best part of a hippie, but in a or a Rasta man, or I don't know. But crappy music played bad, because it's the fashion. I didn't hear it. I like groups. I love the Sex Pistols. I love Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, whatever you call him, as a singer, songwriter. I love Pretenders. And, of course, I had to have an older drummer friend turn me on to that stuff, or I was going to be a little closed-minded. When I got to L.A., it was very hard to listen to things that were my age or younger, because I was sort of following that edict that if you're going to shape up a sound at all, you got to kind of do your own thing. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, there was a lot of conflict, and everybody knows that. And it wasn't only Anthony. Flea, when he was abusive, like if he was calling me a faggot or saying I hate you or something like that, I felt like he was telling somebody else that, and his eyes were sort of misty. Like maybe he was, I don't know, I'm psychoanalyzing, but I don't know what it was. It was maybe they were really high, I mean, they said he was shooting speed in his eyeballs. I don't know. But I'm saying whatever was coming out, and I never got a sense that there was a real true hostility from Flea. I always felt he was just so frustrated and so unhappy, and he had to take it out on somebody. In the case of Anthony, I felt like I was around something that was inhuman, somebody that was like a cipher, like that was just ambition, that had a skeleton and power when he was around. Usually he just wasn't around. But when he was, it was like he had an agenda, and you were there to help him or help you, and don't get in his way. I never got a single sense of a... And if you look at pictures of him now, I ask you to find humanity in his face. I'm sorry, but it's just a scary guy to me, And so it was. I had something I would say. There's a short version, which was just he was either ignoring me or hostile, and those are not two things I really care for, And I'm sure I'm missing some good things that maybe I've filtered out, which sometimes we tend to do when we're, have our own version of are old memories, or they're getting mixed up with childhood memories, because I was attracted into that situation to, replay some vibes that, weren't resolved. I don't think anything happens for an accident. But, it was rough the whole time. It was just, I don't know what I was thinking, or that I could believe that I would be in a group where I pretty much didn't feel wanted at all and was completely maligned and abused, and then leave the group, in other words, be fired, and not, at the same time, not realize it was a legal business partnership and walk away from it until 7 years later, when I was involved in a lawsuit, which was after the statute of limitations and pretty much futile, although checks started rolling in once I, dealt with it. But it's just amazing how completely mixed up and confused I must have been. Yeah, I'm reading this incredible book on the Beatles called Tune In by their Mark Lewison, and you realize it's you can be, to me, a band is kind of about friendship and about the vibe the Beatles put out, or groups that were, I think, the most successful groups, and the groups I admire the most are ones that really seem like they're a bunch of guys who met in school, and the Chili Peppers were certainly that, but they got fractured because two of the guys weren't there until the third album, which I like that record too. I mean, I think that record's the most authentic Chili Pepper record, the one that has Hillel and Jack Irons on it, Uplift Mojo. But it's just funny because you carry those sensations from childhood, and yet at the same time, I mean, why didn't I just get a lawyer the day they fired me instead of just looking for a new band the next second? You know what I mean? And just moving on. And at the same time, join a band where it was so hostile. And I guess I would have just said, oh, well, the Who beat each other up, so it's cool. But, I mean, it was older. It's just a weird thing. Thank God Cliff was there, and we're still friends, because at least I was able to survive the situation because I had somebody, he's a little older than me, but that was at least wanted to eat the way I was eating. And, I wouldn't say Cliff's a loner. So he's not like the kind of person who will overtly be there for counsel or to hold your hands or something, but he's a great guy. And so there was at least that energy that, I felt I was making a friend there, and which has endured. So that's really nice.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a real shame that, 30 plus years later, when the Chili Peppers go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you see guys like Cliff go in, and even their new guitarist went in, and, and obviously you were left off the list. Do you think that's still harboring some sort of ill feelings after all these years, or?
Well, I don't know. At the time, by the way, it was very painful and very confusing, trying to make balance with, what is obviously an ego thing and one's own views of what's fair and just, and it was challenging, and it was very painful. And anticipating it, what if they get in? What'll happen? When they were first nominated, then what if my worst fear comes true, and I'm further maligned and attempted to make invisible. You know what I mean? They'd like to wipe me out of the history. I do not know for a fact what happened or what the policies are. It's a little bit of comfort that the great Andrew Lou Goldham refused to show up because he thinks the hall's bunk, but I don't want to sound that. What platform do I have to defend anything? I mean, that's the whole point. They have this, they're gigantic. The group is just a huge business. And when I was going through it, I talked to an older friend, and he said, "You sued them, right?" He goes, "Case closed." I just don't know what collusion there is with an organization as big as theirs and their management and blah, 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 and the business side of it and the hall and how, you know what I mean? The envelopes are sealed, Price Waterhouse, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like the Academy, I don't know. I assumed, I made a statement that got quoted, and it's the only statement out there, which is, I think it was a way of keeping me out, and that they had a part in it. I have no idea. I really don't know whether they could influence that or not. Navarro's not there. He has I think anyone who made an album with them and that got released, any group, should be invited. I know Bob Welsh was left out of the Fleetwood Mac thing, which is just, I didn't know about it until the time came up because they referenced that. That's unimaginable to me. He reshaped their sound. They had hit songs, with him set the template for the Stevie Nicks Lindsay thing later on, and left him out. Then he went and died. Poor guy. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but I heard there were royalty issues. He'd sued them. End of story. It's like kind of like I'm assuming you drive a car. You drive a car?
Yeah.
You're out there on the roads. If you're like me, you try to be a good driver. You try to understand the impact of minimal road rage, and that you want to keep it like a pretty safe experience out there, right? So I never understood how, if somebody made a boo-boo when you're on the road, I'm not talking about today, which is total mayhem. I'm talking about when I first started driving. and you'd look over in shock because they maybe missed your car by a 16th of an inch, and they're snarling at you with the finger out like, I made a mistake, and I'll kill you if you call me on it. You know what I'm saying? That attitude. And now I perfectly understand that type of thinking. Unconscious hostile behavior is unconscious hostile behavior. It's going to be, it's hostile when they, even through omission, if they were driving crazily, if you call them on it, their ego can't take it because they're just not awake. You follow me at all? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so to me, it'd be like you almost hit somebody, you look over, you make those sad eyes like, oh, I'm so sorry, don't be mad. I mean, there was a time in L.A., this is an analogy still, there's a time in L.A. when people were shooting each other, and it's, where I live here in Little Savannah, it's just horrible. I mean, you're being run off the road all the time. The point is I actually thought that if you made a boo-boo on the road, you say you're sorry, and then everything's better, and you get back to that thing that just kind of makes it neutral and safe for everybody to be out there trying not to run into each other. Well, what's the point of that? The point of it is you don't pay someone, and I'm not saying this is exactly what happened for me, although it did, and I don't know the details of the Bob Welch Fleetwood Mac thing, but you don't. But in any of these scenarios, an organization that's still moving forward and a member's gone, they somehow fail to account to that person their rightful due for their contribution. In other words, they're ripping someone off. So when the guy sues them, they're supposed to show the "I'm sorry, I almost ran into you" face and be really nice. It's no. We're ambitious assholes. We're ripping you off. How dare you call us on it? And by the way, if we ever get inducted into the Hall of Fame, you're not going. Now I understand that evil is as evil does, and there isn't, I guess there's just part of me that just thinks when you make a mistake, you say you're sorry. And I'm not saying this is exactly what should have happened to me. I'm just saying in general, so there's some elements, me being a romantic, and a romantic about rock and roll, meaning the institution of, that believes ultimately there's going to be a happy family. And in my case, it hasn't panned out in my family of origin. It's hard enough to keep my actual family on getting along and on good terms or being close. It hasn't been my karma this time around to have, real easy, happy relationships. And, I bring my part to that, obviously. But I'm just saying, I think for a long time, I have a programming that would long for and believe eventually people say they're sorry, and they kiss and they make up, and things are happy. When the event was unfolding, I tried to step back if I was talking with friends here. It's just, we would almost could have completed each other's sentence. What a great in other words, wondering who will get in, right? What a great opportunity to bury the hatchet and have a really nice, celebration of the group's history. Wasn't meant to be. What do you think happened?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It seems with the Rock Hall, there isn't really a rhyme or reason to things. I know, when Kiss went in and they had probably 50 members in that band and half of them didn't go. You mentioned Bob Welch, so I don't know who's
I can name the 4 original members of Kiss, and I don't even care for the group. Because they're so publicized. But, I hope they got in. I know the history of the Red Hot Chili Peppers pretty well. Everyone has it available to them via any media source they want. And even when I was out of the group, I didn't have any real bad feelings about it. It was okay. It didn't work out. Move on. I wanted to quit a few times myself because it just wasn't fitting. But I soldiered on, and had to do my job. When I brought up to their lawyer, who is still their lawyer, when I brought it up to him before our big tour, which was a very long, arduous time out on the road, I said, I'm thinking about quitting. He says, you quit, I'll sue you. I didn't realize then and there that was illegal, what he was doing. You can't sue your own guy you represent. I should have acted on that right then and there. You know, yeah. He threatened to sue me when he said, you'd be in breach of contract and I'll sue you. You would violate the group's ability to make a living if you quit at this late a juncture before you're about to go on the road. I was scared. I was afraid we'd get in an accident and that we were ill-equipped. We did. We had a horrible accident. It made MTV news. Nobody got hurt, thank God, you know. But I'm just saying, I came back. I felt kind of toughened from the situation. You know, me and Cliff were cooking our natural food and having one healthy meal out a night and just surviving and taking good care of ourselves. It was freezing cold. I came back. I was healthier than when I left. I felt really good. So I was ready to. I said, well, if I can survive that, I could keep going. Next thing you know, I'm out of the group. So, so for that brief moment, I was ready to kind of see what was coming next. You know, just hang in. But what happens with the Hall? I mean, I don't know. If you're saying, well, I'll let you say it. Do you feel I should have been included? As far as by what criteria?
Well, yeah, most definitely. I think, you know, if guys like Cliff Martinez or, you know, this new guitarist that's only been with them, I mean, I think he's probably younger than I am even. I mean, if those guys are going in, you were there from the beginning. I most definitely think you should have been on the list. You
reminded me, thank you. You reminded me of something, which is, I was saying the history of the group. What I'm saying is, to me, you know, as they were moving along and doing the hard work and hanging in there against all odds through the years, you know, before the 90s when they got their huge Warner Brothers deal and Frusciante really started to move into his own as a great songwriter, who their manager, by the way, told me, Lindy and I reconnected a couple of years ago. He told me that John writes everything. I said, well, not the lyrics. And I said, well, you're exaggerating. I wouldn't believe for a second because I always thought Anthony was a fine lyricist. But he said, it's so much him, they're like his sidemen, you know. Well, if you look at the album sales and you look at his popularity and the mythology of this interesting guy, John Frusciante, you know, obviously they sell 10, 15 million when he's on the record and they sell less when he's not. But anyway, my point being, up until he really helped the group emerge into this, you know, sort of super group or whatever you want to call it. And they were just going along, you know, the Freaky Styley, Uplift, and everything. I thought when the three guys got together and I would listen just for fun to that record, I thought, this is great stuff. This is the real band, you know, they sound terrific. It's funny. It's different. I mean, Freaky Styley sounded strange. You know, that's a whole story, but because I had co-written that material, and then they, you know, let me go and got Hillel back, and then I was hearing from Cliff that they were giving Hillel as hard a time, telling them to play like me, which makes no sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But apparently, so he said Flea's just a total Nazi, and they're, you know, just always lashing out and insecure and lashing out and just trying to control everything all the time. So they're the originals, and that should be clear, and no one's going to defend that not more than me, but I will defend that as much as anybody else, that I know who the original Red Hot Chili Pepper band is. You know, Jack Irons, Hillel Slovak, Anthony Kiedis, and Michael Bowsery, also known as Flea. Well, that group occurred once. I mean, other than demos and stuff. That occurred. Third album, excellent production by Michael Beinhorn, who also did Mother's Milk, and doesn't get enough credit, as far as I'm concerned. Well, clearly those guys have got to go in, right? They formed the band. But as far as the world at large, in 1984, which will be 30 years in August, when that album came out, very, very few people across the country or the globe, you know, college radio programmers knew who Hillel was. They get an album, you open it up, the guitar player's Jack Sherman. So as far as the world is concerned, I'm on the first Red Hot Chili Pepper. I know I didn't form the band. I know I was a reluctantly, substitute for another guy, as the Who say. You know what I mean? You know, but I mean, I knew it and I didn't know it. You know, I mean, I didn't know he was going to come back, and I didn't know if he even wanted to be in the band. But the point is I knew that they had guys before, and that they couldn't be there because of contract with another group. They were the joke band. What is this? Was the serious music band? What is this? Tanked. Chili Peppers didn't do that well, but they didn't get dropped. So if there's so much about this mythical thing with poor Hillel who died, why would they even continue? Why would they even do it? What is their motivation to even move forward? Is it any less ambitious and mercenary than mine was for joining? How could if those are the guys, how could they even keep going? Why didn't they just said, darn it, that was fun. Gosh darn it, we got a record deal. Oh gosh darn it, well let's break up. No, we're going to go to a pool of 50 guitar players and hire some guy that we hate. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Oh, they were high, they were young. They're excused. Next, I think we're talking about the Hollywood approach, and that's nothing to be guilty to want to move forward, So to me, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, after saying that, maybe a little bit bitter analysis is Flea and Anthony, period, end of story. Who's endured? Who's always been there? They have. So they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and everybody else. Well, why didn't Frusciante want to show up? Any ideas? I don't know.
Yeah, there must have been some falling out. I know he left the band, came back, left again, so
yeah.
Maybe they just thought the fans would have some sort of backlash if they didn't include him, or
who knows? No, they can't not include him. It would be absurd. It would be completely absurd. Their whole success on the level that they're in that Hall of Fame, the kind of sales, the kind of tour receipts on that level would not exist without John Frusciante, and that's not just hindsight. It's fact. He's the driving musical force in the group that gave them their hits.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I'm just saying if it was strictly on a personal level, maybe Anthony or Flea may have not wanted him to be in there just for whatever falling outs they've had.
I have no idea. Again, it's speculation. There's no idea. He is inducted. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. John Frusciante is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He simply didn't attend. So to clarify, my question was, why did he choose not to attend? Well, there's millions of reasons. Maybe he thinks he's too cool for that, A lot of people look down on it and think it's a bogus organization, All I know is this has nothing to do with anything in particular except that I don't like museums. I mean, when I go in them, I get kind of sleepy and uncomfortable. But, keeping track, which I think is one essence of it, of history, which now this popular phenomenon of rock music or rock and roll, which again, they're different. I think that's important for history to be preserved. But of course, as you well know, it's written by the victors, right?
Yeah.
So I have no platform, and I make no claims other than of having, like I said in that quote, trying to do the best job I could under those circumstances, just to do my job. And try and, of course, that entails being creative and showing up. And, I wasn't a sideman in the band. I was a member of the group. So that it is odd. And obviously, Dave Navarro, they just seem like they picked the two, people that they didn't like and that they don't have super fond memories of that period of difficulty they were going through. In my case, the first record without their original guys, around to do it, which was rough on, they didn't know how to deal with that. And then they lose John and get Dave and do One Hot Minute. But I don't think that's a terrible record. Do you?
No,
I'm not a huge fan. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but they sounded pretty good to me. Still got a Rick Rubin production. You got that My Friends tune, sound like a, kind of right up the new alley that they were mining, that sort of hippity-hoppity ballad, poor me stuff that Anthony was writing, you know what I mean? Been writing that song over and over again now since Under the Bridge. But, I really don't know. Next question.
Well, yeah, and obviously you went on to have a pretty awesome career after that. You played with Bob Dylan and George Clinton and a lot of other huge names, so obviously that says something as far as, the testament to your playing style as well, to kind of mesh with all these different people.
Well, regarding that, the Dylan and Clinton thing happened very close around the same years, 85, 86. I was in and out of the studio with them, and I consider those, because they're high profile, I can understand why you'd bring them up. There's loads of other stuff that maybe didn't get released or was just day-to-day studio work, working with all kinds of terrific people and things that, didn't see the light of day or whatever. But I definitely reference them myself because their dreams come true. I mean, they're both artists that are extremely high on my list of people I love and admire. So working with them was, even though it wasn't big hit records or something, although Cool Joe, the tune I played on with George, made it onto his greatest hits record, which is a nice thing. I'm very happy about that. The Dylan thing is so beyond belief. I'm still pinching myself, but I think if you would have added an S to style, I mean, you probably meant it in plural, but if that's another thing that, for better or for worse, and I'm serious. I mean, it could have been detrimental. Is that I am rather cursed with versatility, and that comes out of partly really loving a lot of different kinds of music. I don't have as much as I might have said earlier about putting the blinders on to peer groups and bands that were coming out that were contemporaries. I remember Tony the Mover. She really wanted me to check out U2, and I quit the band. I said, I'm not going to listen to somebody else. I want you to play like this guy. Well, she's right. He was great. I would later find out the Edge was great, and he was really unique. But, I mean, what the hell was she thinking to ask me to play like somebody who was carving such a unique style? I was doing my own thing, I'm not comparing, saying it's as good or anything like that. I'm just saying that's where my head was at back then. I had learned to play guitar by copying records and copying records that I loved, and I also was lucky enough to get to go play and make money in cover bands. I couldn't believe I got to play the songs I listened to at home for kids dancing and, proms and nightclubs later on and all that stuff. It was amazing. I thought I'd be playing Tony Orlando and Dawn or something. Not that that's that terrible, but I think you know what I mean,
Yeah.
But I mean, no, we got to do, like, the band I was in playing in nightclubs was playing Billy Cobham songs and trying to do all sorts of funk and all kinds of great stuff back in the 70s before I moved to LA. And so that's just it. I just love all this different music and was just constantly learning and wanting to be able to play it on the guitar. So, the Chili Peppers, while we're still talking about my most famous association, although we did try to move on to Bob and George, they had the benefit, and if you listen to the album carefully, of really versatile guitar player, could go in a lot of styles. That I don't think the album would have been as fleshed out, or now in hindsight, because they're so huge, people are listening, I think, to it, and of course it's like discovering for kids that are like 18 and stuff like that. I find out from at least a few of the Facebook friends, and I'm open and I communicate with them. They really like it, and it's rewarding in a sense, but I think part of that's because both Andy, who they hated, he was their hero, but they were real disappointed. We weren't trying to water them down. Weren't trying to make them not a punk band. Police Helicopter's on there. You always sing the same on there. Those songs were fun. I mean, they have a great sense of humor about stuff. The group, that early stuff. But there's also stuff on there like Mommy Where's Daddy, and I think it more shows that they could expand and become more I don't like the word pop because that connotes some really bad stuff. Like, I don't like boy bands or Madonna or any of that stuff. And none of that should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, by the way, if you want my opinion. But you know what I mean. I mean, there's nothing wrong with melodicism. There's nothing wrong with chord changes. When I'd bring them in, when we were first rehearsing in the band, they would call me a fag and a homo and all this stuff, like anything that had anything sensitive other than just slamming top tempo, gnarl was gay, or something to them, which is a bit weird. But what did they make it on? A Little Wing type song, Under the Bridge. You know what I mean? Frusciante brought all that kind of stuff into the group, and all of a sudden, I think, I don't know because I wasn't in regular contact with him, but I think that was hard on Flea. I think he did feel partly that they sold out and compromised their sound. But anyway, after that, there was the fallout from some guys that were coming up as producers had heard me play in bands prior to them, because you got to remember, they weren't known at all for quite a while. but other groups I was playing with. So I started getting more calls to come in the studio and do stuff like that. And, that's what I did for a while, and so forth, so on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Is there anything you've got coming up or any projects we should be looking out for today?
Nope. Nothing that I know of. I moved here in 2003. My kids were still in school. My son was quite young. He was only about 12, and my daughter was just finishing high school. And it was, circumstances where it just seemed like unless we get out of LA, I don't know how I'm going to keep my family together. And that took a lot of energy. And I came here. I don't know why I picked Savannah. I guess because it was an instinct. I mean, part of it had to do with the affordability of homes and things like that. But we just made a radical change. We left California. I knew there was no real music scene. I had been trying to do a original band with a partner, and our singer was in Buffalo. He and I were in L.A. He's from Buffalo. Gary Malaber, who was the drummer on all the later-day Steve Miller stuff, like Fly Like an Eagle, played on Moondance, Van Morrison, all the Eddie Money stuff. Huge hit-making drummer and big touring drummer in the 70s. We were songwriting partners in the 90s with a band called In From the Cold, and I was throwing all my eggs in that basket. I was really having a sort of a midlife writing discovery and really loved the partnership. It was really compatible and inspiring. He ended up finding a singer much, much younger than us in Buffalo, and we would go back and forth and try and put tracks together and play gigs, and it was ended up falling apart, or she quit, or, it was just impossible almost to do that, and it was kind of heartbreaking. And I think I've never officially quit. I still play. I've got gigs this weekend, but it's really more, for the right reasons. Not that pursuing, commercial outlet for your music is wrong. I'm just saying it's not driven by that kind of thing you get into, or I got into, or one gets into when they live in LA and it's the record business and you're trying to get over. You know what I mean? And you're always trying to get something over,
Right.
I'm sure even Paul McCartney, I'm sure he's still trying to write another hit song, you know what I mean? As if he needs another hit song. You know what I mean? You keep trying to top it. But for me, I needed to cool out. And so that's not to say something might not come together in the future, but I'll be very honest, and I'm not, I get worked up when I make music, and I just want to stay. I'm not saying it's bad for my health, but if it starts getting into that, what are we going to do in the future with it thing, it's not good for my health. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of just, and sometimes I feel guilty saying that I'm not. I look at people who have to write a song every day. They just can't help themselves, and I'm just not there. I do play, and I always feel like when I'm getting ready for a gig and I'm working on sounds, and which guitar and amp will work good tonight. I just feel like I'm just starting out, and it's a great feeling. So, if somebody picks up on that, and there was an absolutely perfect situation to do something on a higher profile, I'd consider it. But I'm not actively pursuing that world right now.
Well, Jack, I want to say I do really appreciate you being so generous with your time today. It's been great having you on. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with? Or?
Well, appreciate the opportunity to share my story. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and keep enjoying good music. Thank you.
Excellent. I appreciate you taking the time out.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right, you too. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.